Welcome back to part 2 of the Prey walkthrough tutorial. In this session, we're going to take a look at how I built the thermal vision look, created the heads-up display using particle illusion, and also how I did the video glitch treatment. So if you haven't already downloaded the project file, go ahead and do that, and let's jump in. So the thermal vision look, this look here, is the look that the predator uses to hunt its prey. I guess it's looking for the heat signature. And I've used a variety of different effects to create this. The first pass is this one where the text is fairly small and it's slightly blurry. And then the predator, I guess, presses a button and it's able to zoom in on its prey and it's a little more in focus. And there's a couple of other looks after that. There's this much hotter look. And this is based on one of the looks that I saw from the actual Predator films on YouTube. And there's also this one here, also based on the looks that I saw. So I've used Colorama for the base, but I've used a variety of other effects as well, including many Continuum effects. So let's go back to this one here. Notice how it does transition. And we'll talk about the transitions in a moment. But first of all, let's just take a look at this one here. Now I've called it No Cloak, which is probably not a great name. I only called it No Cloak because it didn't use the cloaking device, but I'm actually going to change that name. I'm just going to change it to Thermal. Makes more sense. And now that we've opened this comp, let's talk about this first. And this is the base look for the thermal vision. Let's just solo the bottom layer, stock image. And this is the stock image comp, which we just looked at. Notice I've applied BCC Tritone. I wanted to remove any warm tones out of the background so that I could make it blue when I applied Colorama. And that way we could focus on the warm tones on the text. Above that we have the text treatment. So this is the prey text, and I've applied Colorama to that. Now, under output cycle, I've used just the default output cycle. Notice the numbers here are red. That means an expression has been applied. So if we just come down to the timeline and hit E twice, we can see that expression. So I've applied a time expression multiplied by 100 to the phase shift. And if we just turn that off, just by clicking on the equal sign, phase basically just, if we just drag it, just animates the colors through the text. And I did that because I wanted the text to have some kind of animation, because remember, the only animation we have on the text is just that little push forward. So by doing this, it just makes it a little more animated, a little more interesting, as if the text is, I guess, kind of alive. So we'll turn that back on. And just to clarify, the reason I use the time expression is because I don't have to set keyframes, obviously. And also, if I make the comp longer than 8 seconds, then the time expression will continue to animate the phase shift without me having to adjust the keyframes. So time expression is really useful for that. Okay, so stock image text treatment. Above that, we have some particles. Now, these are just kind of like drifting particles. They were based on dust, and I got the idea for this, I think it was from Predator 2. There's a scene in Predator 2 where they try and freeze the predator, and they're using these guns that spray snow or ice or something. And these ice particles are floating in the air. And I know that Prey is based on, Native Americans, and there's no technology, but I guess you could think of this as maybe snow. And the reason I put it in there was because it just added some movement into the composition. Because remember, we're using a stock image, and it's not real footage. So there's no, the leaves aren't blowing, and there's no wind. So this just added a little bit of movement. And because I'm using the Continuum version of particle illusion, I was able to use one of the presets that comes in the Continuum version. And it was this one here, Dust Floaters. If you don't have the Continuum version, the plugin version, you can find some dust presets inside of particle illusion. Let's just launch particle illusion. And inside Emitters 2021.5, you can find this floating dust preset, which you could use as a starting point if you don't have the Continuum version. All I've done to this, I'm just going to preview this. All I've done is reduce the number of particles, and I've just increased the weight so that the particles are falling down in the frame. And just turn this off. I've changed the particle itself as well. Now, if you're using version 2022.5 of Particle Illusion, you can double-click on the thumbnail of the particle on the node to open up the particle shape editor. And I switched the sparkle to Clouds 01. And Clouds 01 has 9 frames. If I just click this arrow, you can see each of those frames is slightly different. And I like doing this because if I just cancel that, and just going to give myself a bit of space here. With the particle node selected, notice that I have Use Single Frame selected, and I also have Random Start Frame. So that means it's going to use one of those 9 frames randomly, which gives us a little more variety and makes this look a little more realistic. If I didn't click Single Frame, each particle would cycle through those 9 frames, and I didn't want the particle to animate. So pretty simple. Now, it's a very basic particle simulation, but it just adds a little bit of interest. I'm going to cancel that. So that's the thermal vision treatment. So let's go back and open the main comp. And I'm going to turn off my proxy. Let's take a look at the effects that I used to create this. So I'll just solo this layer. And I'm going to turn all of these off. All right, so the first one is BCC Blur. I've just increased the blur to 25 to make this reasonably blurry because this one's the first thermal vision image that's kind of out of focus. And to give it more of that thermal vision look, I've used BCC Posterize. You can see it pushes it a lot more towards that thermal vision look. Now I know we applied Colorama in the previous comp, but I've applied Colorama again. And this also has the default output cycle, but I've adjusted the phase shift, just drag that, to bring it so that the background is blue and the text is red. So remember I talked about this being cool and this being hot. So this has a heat signature and this doesn't. If I just drag that, you can see we can take it all the way in the other direction and make this more cool and this hot. I'm going to undo that. And that's not animated in this comp. Now the next effect is BCC Scanline. And I know the Predator doesn't use a television, he has a heads-up display, but I wanted to give this some kind of TV style feel. I could have used dots, I guess, but Scanline was nice and quick and dirty. Now BCC Linear Wipe and Offset and BCC+Directional Blur are all part of the transition, so we'll talk about those in a moment. But the last effect in the stack is BCC Damaged TV. Now for this, all I've used is the noise, just to add some RGB noise on top. And the reason I've put it last in the stack is because I wanted to have that noise on top of this transition. That'll make sense in a moment. And here's the finished shot. Notice how the phase shift is moving through the text, adding a bit of life. And you can also see the particles floating around in the background, giving the background some movement as well. Okay, let's look at the next one. So this is almost identical. It's just slightly larger text and a few minor adjustments. For BCC+Blur, rather than 25, I've dropped that down to 8. So there's a little bit of blur in there. If I take that out completely, you can see it's too sharp. And you may notice also that after decreasing that blur, we can see some warmth in the particles and also a little bit in the background as well. And I would prefer those blue, so that probably needs a little bit of adjustment, but we'll leave it for now. And beneath that, we have Colorama Scanline as per before, and we have a different transition, Swish Pan. We've got the offset and the directional blur and the damaged TV. We'll talk about these three in a moment. Going to solo the next layer. So the main difference with this one and the previous ones is that this is using a different output cycle. And the output for this one is one of my favorite output cycles for Colorama, Fire. And I put levels before that just to increase the contrast. Makes it a bit brighter, and the resulting Colorama look is just a little bit better, I think. The next one is also using Colorama, and the output cycle for this one was Solarize Gray. But you can see I actually changed the black to a blue. And I've added a couple of keyframes for cycle repetitions. Let's just solo that one. If I press Ctrl-Alt-B with this layer selected, you can see it adjusts the work area to that layer. Now press 0 just to do a quick RAM preview. And now you can see it more clearly. See how it's cycling through those repetitions? And it's making that look a little bit more interesting. And the last one in the stack is text treatment. And we've already looked at the text treatment comp. You can see this is just the base text treatment with no effects applied. All right, so that's the treatment for the thermal look. Now let's look at the transitions. So the cloak layer has a linear wipe. So we'll focus on these two first. Now for this one, I've used a linear wipe, but notice how it's all broken up. This is BCC Linear Wipe, and I like this wipe because it has, under extras, this pattern option. And I've chosen roughest noise. There's a few different options in there you can choose from. Once you've chosen a pattern, you can just twirl open pattern settings, and you can adjust these. So I'm just going to play with the amount and the detail. So this just made this look a little more aggressive, I guess, just a little more interesting rather than a straight or a feathered line. So that wipes cloak off and wipes thermal vision on. Remember, for the thermal layer, I've used offset and BCC+Directional Blur. So let me just turn offset on. And see how that shifts the layer left? It's a really simple effect. It only has two options, Shift Center to and Blend with Original. And I've used Shift Center to just to slide the layer slightly left. But notice when it's offset, it actually repeats the layer. So you don't get any transparency. If I was to use the position transform property, then I would have, transparency here, and I'd have to use something like reptile or motion tile to fill that up. So this is just a really nice way just to slide that text into place and just make it look a little more dynamic and a little more interesting. And to blur that, I've just used BCC+Directional Blur. Just a nice high quality and fast blur. If we hit the U key, you can see there's a few keyframes there. So there's the Shift Center to keyframes and the blur amount keyframes for directional blur. So it just slides into place with this sort of faked motion blur. And that also has the secondary function of hiding that seam that was created by the offset effect. And notice these two keyframes here. This is for the linear wipe effect. And the linear wipe effect was actually added before I created this look. So you can see it's higher up in the effects stack. In this one, we could actually just drag it down and it shouldn't really make any difference at all to the look. And this one transitions to the zoomed in, less blurred version. Basically an identical transition. And you can see that this also uses offset and BCC+Directional Blur. To transition to the next layer, I just wanted to mix it up a little bit. And for this one, I used Swish Pan. For this one, I've chosen top to animate it vertically. Let's just turn this layer on. And this also has the Swish Pan effect. Transition to the next color treatment. But this layer has a different one. This has BCC+Video Glitch Dissolve. I'm going to turn the text treatment on. So you can see that breaks that up with this kind of video glitch look. And I think in my final look, I actually had a few more frames, or at least one more frame. So we need to just untrim this by one frame. That's better. Okay, so here's the look with the transitions, and it's definitely moving in the right direction. But at this point, I felt it wasn't quite grungy enough. And it was also missing this little detail here. I presume this is some kind of audio waveform, so I thought I'd have a go at creating that as well. Let's start with that. I've called it HUD. Let's just turn that on. And here it is here. So for that, I've used BCC Particle Illusion, After Effects Mirror Effects, and BCC Mosaic and Linear Wipe. So we'll just turn off these three and just concentrate on the particle illusion. So this is just some spinning brackets or arrows. Just twirl that open and we'll take a look. For this, I actually use one of the presets. And if you're using particle illusion, presets are a great place to start. The one I used was Readout 1. Let's search for that by typing in Readout. And here it is here. So this is a fairly detailed preset. You can see there's these dots over here and these numbers and these spinning arrows. And I've actually turned the dots off and I've turned the numbers off. And for the circles, I replaced those with this bracket. And the circles were already spinning, so now we have spinning brackets. The only other thing I did was just reposition it and also change the color to a red. Now you can see how this is symmetrical, so I needed to find a way in After Effects to create that symmetry. And for that, I used the mirror effect. Let's just turn that on. And if we drag the effect control point, I'm holding down the Shift key just to constrain that. You can see how we can move them apart. So for not much effort, I've got something that looks pretty close to that. I did feel it was a little clean though, so I applied BCC Mosaic just to break that up. And I also used BCC Linear Wipe just to wipe this on with the transition. Otherwise it just cut on and it looked a bit weird. I'll just turn that on and just hit U. And you can see there's a couple of keyframes there just for % done for BCC Linear Wipe. So this will just wipe on as the transition's happening. Just like that. Now, looking at this example, it is actually brighter down the center. And I'm thinking there's probably a quick way we can do that. Let's just give it a go. So if we press Shift Control or Shift Command C, just to pre-compose this, keeping Move All Attributes. And then we could just duplicate that. And you could use BCC Hue Saturation Lightness or just Hue Saturation. Just decrease the saturation, -100, and increase the lightness. And we could also change the blend mode, something like Add. I think you can see where this is going. And just hit Q to grab the mask tool, draw out a mask. Holding down the space bar, we can reposition that. I've still got the mouse key held down. Now something like that. And probably want to feather that mask a bit just by hitting F. There we go. So that's something similar. All right, now let's take a look at the video glitch. To create the video glitch look, I've used BCC+Video Glitch. The first one has just been used to add some subtle overall thin shifting lines. You can see I've left this little marker, Shift Thin Light. That's the name of the preset. Let's open up the FX editor. And that's the preset down here, Shift Thin Light. I created a whole range of presets for this effect. And for many of them, I've used only single parameters just to keep them more subtle. You can see every so often, it just adds this thin shifting displacement. Now, the transitions are a different story. I wanted extra glitch over the transitions. And what I'll generally do when I'm adding something like glitch to my looks, I'll apply video glitch to an adjustment layer, and then I'll just trim the adjustment layer to the areas where I want the glitch. So for example, on this first one, you can see how this is much more glitchy. And to find the glitch look that I like, with the layer untrimmed, what I'll do is just slide it along until I find a frame that I like. And then I'll just trim it off. So I've done that for this one, and this one. They're all the ones that sit over the transitions. I might just turn all of these on now. There's that one there. And most of them are about 1 or 2 frames. Just turn this one off for a moment. There's that one there. And that one there. That's just shifting that vertically. And I did actually add this one here to add extra video glitch just over these 2 layers. Just to make this more glitchy before the final logo reveal. And the last one just adds a little bit of glitch as the Prey logo cuts off. Much more interesting than a boring cut. And you can see what a difference that BCC+Video Glitch actually makes to this, just giving it that nice edgy tech feel. All right, let's bring this home with the last few adjustment layers. The first one is BCC Grunge. And if we just turn this on and off, you can just see a little bit of change around the outside. You can see I've actually masked this effect off. If we change the blend mode from soft light back to normal, we're using one of the textures that comes standard with BCC Grunge, this one here, LT Gallery, which is just this scratched metal. I guess my intent here was that the HUD of the Predator was slightly scratched, and it's really subtle. Let me just turn soft light back on. You can see if I roll in there, there's a little scratch there. So a little bit scratched around the outside. Above that, we have the rolling Scanlines, and this is using BCC Scanline. But for this one, I've increased the thickness to 200, so these are really thick lines. Let's just create a new solid, Control or Command Y. And now you can see that more clearly. Notice how the roll RGB speed is -5. So that's just moving these bars really slowly vertically, and also adding a bit of extra noise. And above that, we have BCC Fast Film Glow for a nice filmic glow. And finally, I should just mention the audio. Now, I was very lucky to have our very own Ben Brownlee volunteer to do the audio for this. He did the main audio, but very late in the game, I did actually add a couple of swishes just over these transitions, and also a little bit of glitch over that final bit of video glitch as the text cuts off. So let's just quickly review what was covered in these tutorials. First of all, I created the prey look by using an EPS that I traced in Illustrator, and that was done using BCC Extrude EPS and BCC Rock. For the cloaking look, I used a stock photograph, cut out some of the trees and moved them in Z, and animated a camera to give that a bit of parallax. I added a bit of BCC fog, and created the displacement look on the text using BCC displacement map and BCC edge lighting. For the thermal look, I used Colorama with a little bit of BCC+Blur and BCC Posterize, a bit of particle illusion to add some movement into the background, plus a variety of BCC transitions. The basis of the heads-up display was particle illusion, and I used loads of BCC+Video Glitch to give it that overall glitchy look. Then finished it off with a little bit of finessing using BCC Grunge, BCC Scanlines for those rolling scan lines, and BCC Fast Film Glow. So hopefully you found that useful. If you're not using Continuum, you can download a demo at boriseffects.com, where you can also find a range of tutorials to learn how you can include Continuum into your workflow. For now, this is John Dickinson. Have fun, be creative, and I'll see you in another tutorial.